Thank you very much, and for the generous introduction. And hi, my name's Nick Badminton, and I lived in British Columbia for 12 years, and I've been coming there for over 20 years. Did a ski season back in 2003 up in lovely Whistler Blackcomb. So it's a real pleasure for me to be joining you today at the LGMA 2021 conference. Before we start, I'd just like to add my own land acknowledgement. I'm now here in Toronto, in Junction Triangle. And I'd like to acknowledge that the land I'm broadcasting from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And thank you for having me at the conference as well. And this presentation is about resilient government and thinking differently about how we can plan our futures. And my story started when I was quite young, when I was 8 years old. I was hugely influenced by technology and science fiction, and my father gave me this book. This is the Osborne Book of the Future. And it talked about the world in the year 2000 and beyond, I should say. And really, even in the year 2020, we're not quite where we thought we would be with lunar settlements and mining under the sea and a whole bunch of different robotic devices in our world. But the world is accelerating faster than ever before. Now, the thing that I do when I speak to local government associations, big government, large companies as well, is a mindset shift. Shifting the mindset from what's happening today, the things that we need to take care of operationally, to what if. What if the world was going to change, and how do we best prepare for that? And to do that, I like to ground myself in some history and look at industrial revolutions. About 280 years ago, the Industrial Revolution started, and it happened across three different dimensions of communications, energy, and transportation. And as innovations accelerated in all three of them, they added to the economy, they grew populations in cities, they added to the GDP of countries as well. But today, we're in the fourth Industrial Revolution. Everything is connected by the internet. We've got communications running faster than ever before in real time and everywhere through social media. We've got renewable energy, and we've got automated transportation. And whilst we're at the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution journey, I think that we're gaining pace on a daily basis. This presentation is going to present a number of different, what we call it in the Foresight industry, signals of change. And as a futurist, I always scan the horizon on what could be coming, whether that's from academia, from business, from startups, from large companies as well, and how that may shape our future as well. And I invite you after this session, and you've learned about the things that I'm seeing, to go out and look in your communities and find the signals that are going to influence your strategy and your thinking about the future. But I kind of want to go to a big picture view first. I want to look at global shifts. And when we start to look at these global shifts, we can see that it's taken a pandemic for us to realize that the world is a little bit more fragile than we've expected it to be. If we actually look at the industrial revolutions and the industrial complex that we sit in, we see that everything from hospitals and schools and transportation, the way that we work and the way that we live our lives has been shaken to the core. We kind of didn't have a plan, and we totally should have had a plan, because this pandemic certainly isn't the first, and it's definitely not going to be the last, unfortunately. But to really frame things, we need to understand where we are in that road to the future. Jim Dator is a researcher out of Hawaii at the university out there, and he talks about 4 different states of the future: continuation, transformation, limits and discipline, and decline and collapse. Some people may look at the last 280 years and think that it's a mix of transformation, limits, and collapse. We may have thought that the world was in collapse as part of the pandemic year that we've just gone through. But I think that we've got an opportunity to turn our fate around and to start saying, okay, what do we need to do in local government, and how do we serve our citizens the best as well? But there's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have right now is the water, food, energy nexus. These things are so essential to our well-being, the operations of our cities and the operations of the world, that we have to really be masters of working out how best to optimize all of these. Without water, we don't have food, and without water, we don't have energy. And all three of these link together through the transportation that's needed to pass them around the world as well. And in fact, what's happening is a really interesting global shift in terms of economic power. By 2030, we're going to have China in the number one position, with India at number two, and the US has been sort of demoted to number three. There's a real shift towards the East and the power that's coming from there, and the sort of the ringleaders of new thinking like China and India about how the world could work. And in fact, 35% of global GDP will be from Asian countries by 2030. So we have to start to build those bridges and work out how we can best work, even at the local government level, with the people that are coming to us from these places and the companies that we rely on for infrastructure and everything else. And what's really interesting when we start to look at the big picture in terms of population growth as well, is that we see an explosion of population growth in Africa. And what's happening is there's a huge movement in Canada and across African, Asian continents as well, of 2.5 billion people will be shifting to urban populations and cities by 2050. 90% of that will happen in Africa and Asia. And what's interesting when we start to look a little closer to home is that we're starting to realize that more foreign-born people are coming to major cities. And we've certainly seen that in places like Vancouver and Kelowna and beyond within BC. And we're certainly going to see that going forward. In fact, in 2020, over 44,000 new immigrants arrived in BC alone. I arrived in BC back in 2008 as an immigrant. I became a Canadian a number of years ago. I was certainly happy to be part of the business ecosystem there as well. But what we did as part of this preparation for this keynote is going out to you to ask you, how you were thinking about the future and what was needed on the ground today. So I'm going to go into 3 different signals that we got from a survey that you did. What's the biggest concern for your local government? When you look at the data, I was expecting climate change and sustainable transportation to be huge on this. And they fell far behind sort of a mishmash of a number of things around, affordability of where you live and the places that you want to purchase, resiliency, sustainability, and social issues. That was really telling to me, and it is really heartening to know that so many parts of BC are looking at the right kinds of things that ensure a resilient life for the people that live here. What's the most important thing that you can provide to residents? Again, really, really exciting for me. Over 50% of people said smart city infrastructure and community-wide internet. But really smart cities go beyond technology. They transcend that. So when you look into the category of other, we've got accountability and transparency, which is really strongly needed. Zero waste, affordability comes in again. And obviously open data is going to be important, but that's sort of the pipe work of local government rather than being the thing that a lot of people in society see. And thirdly, and what I think is very important from a societal perspective, is culturally, what should we invest in? I'm a huge fan of street art and 5%, okay, that goes with the territory. There's only a certain number of people. But what's really interesting here is 71.7% of people said community spaces for connection. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on in the presentation. Thank you so much for your input on that. It's really good to sort of pull back the covers and understand what's going on. But every presentation I do, once we've looked at the global view, I like to dial in and start talking about climate and energy as well. We're in a world of agreement. Temperatures are absolutely rising, and it's not getting better. In fact, we're not going to hit the Paris agreements that have been set out. More frequent extreme weather events are going to be happening. Rising seas, population migration, decrease in Arctic sea ice, and conflict over natural resources. Drought and warming will put an increased strain on the US power grid. This is from a report from the United States Army. And I sort of lean into this because it's fairly irrefutable in terms of content for my presentations and also for the very important conversations I have with people about global warming. But to get out of that, we need to start looking at a different energy mix in the world. We've been relying on coal and gas and oil for too long. We need to start leaning into a world where we have solar and wind, and we're really lucky in BC to have so much hydro as part of the mix. But we can look to the future and see that by 2050, 86% of global energy demand could be met by renewable energy. And in fact, it's cheaper on a yearly basis to run renewable energy infrastructure than it is to run fossil fuel infrastructure. So we have to start now. And they have done down in Australia as well. I mean, we had Men at Work as part of the opening music. I got 8 out of 9 songs. I'm sorry to fail you on one of the songs in there. But when we look down to Australia, it's incredibly exciting. We've got things down in South Australia, Hornsdale Wind Farm. And they put a call out there having trouble with energy storage and provision. So Elon Musk and his team at Tesla came up with the world's largest Tesla battery farm there. And within 3 years, it basically paid off the $90 million infrastructure investment that they made. Then we can go and look smaller within our own communities and start to think about a trend that really is emerging quite widely, which is micro energy grids. Here in Brooklyn, they put solar panels on top of their apartment blocks, and now they're trading that energy between different units and different buildings in the grid within New York City using blockchain technology. Incredibly futuristic and very well applied. Then we can look to Holland, Die Aardehuizen, and this is off-the-grid settlements that deal with all of their waste, they deal with all of their energy needs, and they deal with all of the food that they need within their very, very small community. And these ideas are going to start to spring up in BC and around Canada as well. But I speak a lot to farmers, and farming is an important sector within British Columbia. But why not start to think about putting agrovoltaics above the crops as well? So you actually use that land in 2 different ways. You grow the food and you generate energy. And that kind of incentivization is really needed as we start to move towards a renewable energy grid. But transportation is incredibly important. I talked about it as part of industrial revolutions. And whilst we're seeing that vans and trucks and heavy haulage isn't really shifting to electric vehicles, we're starting to see buses, municipal transportation really shift in a big way. And our own personal transportation, I've been driving electric vehicle for 3 years now, and the electric vehicle infrastructure in Ontario is nowhere as good as it is in BC. So it's good to see more and more people buying that kind of electrified transportation. And it's coming to us more widely. So Tesla's got its Semi in Norway, where they've got a huge amount of electric vehicles. Over 40% of new cars are now electric. They've got electrified infrastructure going further into local ferries as well. And there's lots of these within the interior BC. We've also got the big haulage ships in China. This one travels 40 miles up the Yangtze every day and 40 miles back. It's electric. It takes about 4 hours to recharge. It's exciting to see this technology. The irony of that particular vessel is that it actually hauls some of its cargo is coal, which seems a bit backwards in a modern forward-looking world. But if we look to China, we've got tens of thousands of electric buses being deployed in cities all across China every single day. Look to China for some of these signals about how the world will become electrified. And then farmers can look to other kinds of electricity generation using things like anaerobic digesters, putting energy back into the grid, being another revenue stream as well. Super exciting for me to see that. But our future is going to be defined in a world where there's going to be real-time energy generation, and it's going to be passed around the world like data is passed around the internet. Now, these super grids aren't going to happen at scale until about 2040, 2050, and through to 2060. But we're starting to see the beginnings of this infrastructure in places like Asia and the North Atlantic already. So do watch out for that as well. And in the future, energy is going to be so cheap, we're literally going to be charged for the transmission of the energy, not the energy itself. Okay, so what's the next step for us when we're thinking about technology beyond climate and energy? We've talked about industrial revolutions. We've talked about the 3 dimensions that drive change. Well, I like to talk about infinite humanity and where we're likely to go. Infinite humanity is defined still by the connected energy, by automated vehicles, by faster than ever communications through social media and beyond, and everything is connected. But we've got biology added to the mix as well. It's us. It's the systems that we use. It's how our bodies operate. It's how we congregate as societies. All of that data is becoming hugely valuable in the world as we start to tap into that. And that's really going to drive us forward into infinite potential. But really, we're in a world where software is eating every single industry around us. We all use technology. I'd be surprised if there was one person listening today that did not have a smartphone as well. Normally when I'm in a room full of people, I ask that question. There's always someone at the back that works in cybersecurity that doesn't have anything. So if you're on the line as well, I see you and I hear you. But what's interesting when we start to look at that software eating the world, that we may have used any of these applications. In fact, all of these companies that we see here, including like Twitter and Facebook, YouTube, Shopify, even companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin that are taking us to the stars, Airbnb, Netflix, none of these existed 25 years ago. And so can you imagine what the pandemic would have been like without any of these connected systems? It would have been really interesting. In fact, this whole conference might have been a really long conference call. Thank goodness that we're in a different state today. Okay, let's start to think about data-driven government and what that can look like as well. So I like to think about the pyramid of data. We collect data and we turn that into information. That's the work of spreadsheets, and some of you might love that and some of you might loathe that. And then we transform that into knowledge, and then we turn that into wisdom. And that wisdom is deeply human, and that's the coming together of all of us to build great strategies that take our communities further. But what's really interesting is that data is accelerating faster than ever before. There's a couple of stats I'd like to pull out. Microsoft and LinkedIn pulled this data from a survey. 40 billion plus increase in emails delivered between February last year and February this year. And boy, have we felt that as well. But by 2025, each of us is going to have over 4,900 digital engagements every single day. All of the interconnected systems and what we do is just going to be interconnected in ways that we've never seen, with the cloud and the Internet of Things, the self-driving cars that we may tap into, the systems that we use. We're not going to be aware of everything. So this is something that's subconsciously happening in the world of data. But it's not so good in Canada right now because we kind of lost focus a little bit. Our digital competitiveness has been slipping. We've taken our eye off the ball. So where we were last year, we dropped down from number 4 in the world in terms of competitiveness to number 11. So, our mastery of knowledge and technology and the future readiness has been a real issue. And I'll be honest, myself and other futurists that work in my think tank have actually been busier than we've ever been before in our entire lives, working with everyone from the Bank of Canada to federal governments around the world and cities. It's really exciting times. But one of the biggest messages is that we have to really be ready for the digital world. We have to put in infrastructure. And that touches every single part of the BC economic infrastructure. All of our sectors, we're incredibly diverse. We all need technology, we all need data, we all need to connect, and we all need to make things work in new ways. As we come out of the back of the pandemic, there's a new excellence that's needed in terms of digital infrastructure. And what's interesting is that if you look across companies that are really starting to master the new world, about 98% of the executives are now planning to redesign their organizations to make them fit for tomorrow. And that's really important. Take a look at how you run your governmental operations and realize that the world doesn't need the same structures that we had before the pandemic and that we need to evolve. And some companies use something called the Bionik model of operations. And within Bionik companies and Bionik government, we've got 3 parts. We've got behavioral capital, the capital that we earn from the people in our organizations. We've got cognitive capital, the algorithms within our organizations that make us work more automated and really combine, the human wisdom with the systematic approach. And then we've got the network capital as well. How we operate with our operators and our partners and the citizens within the community. Once we master this, then we're starting to really cook on gas and really push our economies forward. Okay, let's go beyond that and start to think about what exponential economies can look like. 88% of businesses worldwide plan to adopt robotic automation. So that can be everything from self-driving cars to all sorts of systems within your businesses that help automate the back office as well. And when we start to look at the future, we can see that artificial intelligence, which is a big topic, is going to modernize and reshape every single part of life. It's not if an industry or a government is going to be affected by artificial intelligence, it's when. So, thinking about artificial intelligence, I put together a short video of systems that you might see in the next 5 to 10 years in the places that you live. Okay, lots of speculations about the future of our cities and what technologies could live in there. Some of that is real, some of that is speculative. What's interesting is the Amazon blimp and the drone control ships. That's actually a real patent that they were awarded last year. So maybe that's going to be floating over some of the larger cities in British Columbia as well. So the pyramid of data has changed somewhat with artificial intelligence. The production of spreadsheets and the collection of data, the turning that of information could disappear. I'm sorry to those people that love spreadsheets. But now we're freed up to be able to divine more knowledge and more wisdom that helps us do a better job every single day and helps us really turn everyone in the organization into a strategic resource. And in fact, if we start to think about artificial intelligence, this could have a huge global effect, $15.7 trillion in added global economy revenues by 2030. But what about the jobs for the people in the places and working? So if we start to think about the people in our communities, we can't just think that suddenly robots and machines and these systems are going to replace the people on the ground. That's not what we need in society. I don't perpetuate that narrative. In fact, empathy, humour, creativity and problem solving is almost impossible today to codify and automate. And even if we could, it's awfully strange to be being told a joke or having some kind of compassionate conversation with a machine. It's a deeply human activity. So I like to talk about intelligence augmentation. So it's about human and the machine. It's about us working together with these systems. And this is a capability in addition to data that we're going to have to build. Okay, so let's look at resilient government and beyond that as well. it's really interesting how we connect with the technical companies that are helping us revolutionize our communities. If you looked at Denmark, they did something really interesting a couple of years ago. They sent an ambassador to Silicon Valley, and they've got a consulate there. In fact, this is where it is, just outside of Mountain View, where Google is, to build the relationship so we can understand what's going on. Who in British Columbia and who within your cities is maybe doing that? Could be really interesting as an idea to put that into place. Also, what's really interesting, and I work with the United Nations, so full disclaimer, are the Sustainable Development Goals that they put together. And these Sustainable Development Goals, everything around reducing consumption, climate action, gender equality, everything that really makes a better world is something that you need to be starting to be educated about, educate your community and also the businesses within that, and start to lean into to think about how that can help how we operate in the world. Also, a big movement right now is the circular economy. The cycle of reduce, reuse, and recycle, and really looking at how our goods and services not only travel around from the warehouses to our homes, but from home to home, and how our society can actually reuse what we've already got out there. In fact, the new apparel industry really is not going to grow the same amount as the used apparel industry. And we're going to see this around the world. And this has actually got a huge boon in terms of jobs as well. Over 380 million jobs globally, more than $12 trillion in business savings and revenue could be generated by 2030. So that's a big trend to look out for. You drive past a thrift store on the street now, well, you're going to have streets full of businesses that operate in exactly the same way. Let's look at something that we mentioned earlier. A lot of people were interested in, and that's smart cities as well. But I think smart cities need to get smarter beyond technology. They need to think at new frameworks. So open government invites people within our communities to communicate and get involved more often than they do today around education and consultation, deliberation, the ability to work horizontally, to break down the silos, to really be progressive around the policies in our communities and how we can build resilience and abundance together. But it's really interesting when we start to see what makes cities tick as well. Go out and read the book Happy City by Charles Montgomery, and his team does amazing work all over the world. He's based in Vancouver. And he cited some research from John F. Helliwell here. Trusting cities are happier cities. So we have to build that social infrastructure, or what he says is emotional infrastructure, to bring cities together so that those cities can work to really be more cohesive and come together. One of the things I used to do when I was in Vancouver was once a year, there used to be something called Bike Rave. You get thousands of people on bikes cycling around the city, coming together as communities. In other places, I've seen mural festivals, just like I saw in Vancouver as well. In addition, and I think most importantly, we're going to see cities being places where your food is grown, and that food is going to produce more accessibility in terms of nutrition than maybe we have today. And people like Malik Yakini and his group from the D-Town Farm and the Detroit Black Community Food Security Network are real beacons of hope in North America around how that can be achieved, especially on land that may not be used today. Then I look to people like Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, and her big initiative around Paris en Commune. The idea that you've got a walkable city, that everything you need is within 15 minutes of where you are. The city's built for people and around people. It's not built around vehicles and transportation. Go and look at that. It's an amazing project, and it's being done at scale. And they're trying to get rid of all vehicles from the center of Paris. And if you've ever been to Paris, you can see the parking and the amount of vehicles that are there. And I can't wait to go back and see what happens. But really, when we start to think about smart cities, but really looking at smarter cities, I like to look at this acronym called HEART. Now, what does that stand for? The H is for human-centered design. We need to come back to what we need as a community and what we need as humans, families, people that work there. We need to look towards the entrepreneurial spirit of everyone in the community to drive that passion and that transformation of what we can become if we start to think about resiliency and abundance. We need to develop our assets for the greater good. So we're not making this inaccessible, we're making this openly accessible, we're making this cheap or even free to gain access to. And then we're thinking about those circular economy principles, renewable, repeatable, replicable, really starting to build circular economies in every single part of British Columbia. And obviously, there's going to be technology-enabled connections. And those connections are going to be really important, not only from the operations and the emergency services and the schools and all of the businesses, but also the homes within that, especially because we've really lent in and relied on so much technical connection in the time of the pandemic. Okay, as we sort of wrap up the end of this keynote, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what I do in terms of planning and how I work with people. I spent over 25 years working with companies in strategic planning for technology and looking out over the next 3 to 5 years. In strategic foresight, I look out 5, 10, 20 plus years. Sometimes I even look out to 100 years. And what's really interesting is you can find yourself in your city, look around and ask yourself, what's this going to be like in 1,000 years? That's how we think about the world as futurists. Once we imagine the future, we can build a bigger vision, strengthen strategic planning, and anticipate risks today. In fact, I've got a framework that I've developed and there are hundreds of frameworks within foresight and futurism that we can lean into. But very simply, I establish some principles. The ones that I use are around humanity, not technology, plurality, inclusion, and equity, scientific fact, and creativity. And then, like we've done today, look at the signals of change and listen to what they're telling us. Then we build hypothetical scenarios. What might that future look like? We might tell ourselves short stories, we might draw some pictures, we might pull together presentations like this one. And then you can go a little deeper with speculative fiction. I know some futurists that actually write entire novels for companies and the military and government to tell stories about what the future could be. And once you've created that view of 5, 10, 20 plus years, you know the projects and the initiatives and the people and the dynamics, you can start to backcast some of that evidence to today and start to do better planning. And one part of what I've done over the past few years, and one particular project that I like to showcase is from British Columbia, and it's from YVR Airport.
Plans for the future of YVR are taking shape. Our 2037 master plan is a blueprint for an airport that'll continue to reflect the best of BC. Sustainable, welcoming, and diverse. YVR will be a feast for the senses, a hive of activity and interaction, a business hub for entrepreneurs, and a unique retail experience that is second to none. Help shape the future of our world-class sustainable airport by attending public meetings and sharing your input online.
I worked with a company called Airborne, who is a PR company. I worked with the executive at YVR Airport back in 2017, and we did 4 consultations to find out what people in the area wanted from their airport. It became so popular, 18 million different impressions online. Myself and Craig, who was the CEO at the time, we were on television and radio talking about this. We ended up having many, many more consultations from more cities in the surrounding Greater Vancouver Regional District, and it really brought together and galvanized ideas of what the airport could be. What's really interesting, though, is that earlier this year, YVR announced a new part of the airport called the Glassed-in Island Forest. So you can get outside as well as being in the terminal as well. And look at that. It looks almost exactly like the vertical forest, which is a vertical farm inside the airport that provides food. Whilst that island forest doesn't provide food, that maybe it will in the future. So I felt rather proud that that kind of activity was considered anew from those future visions. In fact, research has shown us that firms that have a high future preparedness can expect on average a 33% higher profitability and a 200% higher market capitalization growth when you compare them to the average. And when you look at the research people like René Rohrbeck, most recently that's really shown us that there's a lot of value in working with foresight consultancies and people to really start to look out to long vision. And cities are really that place that we must do that as well. And that's it. Looking at our operations on a day-to-day basis takes up our time, but we have to really carve out a few minutes every single day to wonder, what if? What if the world was different? What if that world's going to be different for our children and their children as well? What if we start to think about new technologies, new processes, engaging in whole new ways? What if our cities can be more resilient and more abundant and more affordable, accessible, and transparent than ever before. And that's what I do when I start to think about the future of resilient government. I start to think about the human element. I think about technology because I think a lot of it is cool. I think a lot of it can really make a big difference. But more importantly, I think about community and how we can come together. And this conference is a perfect platform for the ideas that we can all have, and we can share them. And I really welcome everyone to ask me questions as part of the Q&A, as part of this presentation. So thank you very much for your time.